3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
Hey everyone, hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West, and we're back with honestly one of my favorite stream series, because it means we get to read Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah,
and we get to chat with Matt, who's always a delight to have around.
You're too kind.
Oh, not kind enough. And well, in this stream we basically just dissect down to the barest bone Tolkien's wonderful prose.
Already got some fun comments in the chat, which is great.
4. Okay, I'll go over that first then. We have Elf Friend, who's always welcome. I always like having her around. She's really nice.
Hail to thee, Elf Friend.
Yep, she's a fellow Tolkien tuber, so do go sub to her.
Definitely.
Yeah. I believe she's
Mark. I've seen Mark several times in our various chapter discussions. Good to see you again, sir.
Yeah, we couldn't have started without you, Mark. So never fear. Good evening to you as well. And now I believe Elfren is probably overtaking our main channel, the Brothers Krynn. So good for her. I believe so. I've not checked of late. I'm sorry, Elfren. I'll have to do that soon. I've just been so busy and swamped with other things. I've barely.
Yeah. Now you said you were just coming from class. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm in a sailing safety course, and
okay, so that's a class. That's like a hands-on, I assume. It's not like a
it's online.
Write a paper or something.
It's online, and we have to take a lot of notes. I have to take a lot of screenshots, and the professor talks really fast. Now, English is my second language, and him and the other students talk so fast, I'm often just left smile.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But they're very smart, and they know what they're talking about. But they're using there's a lot of science in it. I'm not very good at science, so I'm also slowed down by and hampered by my lack of familiarity with a lot of terms and a lot of stuff, and so I have to also research during class. So,
no, that's true. Oh, I feel for you on that. I mean, taking a class that is in your second language. Oof. Yeah, I still have nightmares somewhat of, like, I took a class trip, high school. I did high school French.
Ooh.
And we went to Belgium for our French trip. God bless. I was so out over my skis. I mean, I was just like, I know I could speak and I can read and understand, but like to take someone speaking, interpret what they're saying in real time, and then spit back an answer in their language was, let's just say I was, little past my abilities.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
There.
So kudos to you is my point. Well done.
French, there's a lot that goes on in the language itself.
Yeah, but when I took the a similar, it's because there's 3 courses for being a maritime sailor or whatever, and deckhand. And the thing is, the first one was in French, so I really did well in it. But then this one's in English, so it's a little more tricky for me. But I'm following, and it didn't help that at one point my internet broke up. So when I was actually asked by the prof at one point, so Joseph, what did you think of this? What is your answer to this question? I don't have the answer because my internet broke.
No, that's got to happen though. That's okay.
Yeah. He actually asked me where I am, and I told him I'm in the countryside. And he said,
Now your sailing would come in handy in this chapter. Right off the bat, they're on the water, so they could use your course in sailing. I guess a ferry's a little easier maybe than sailing, but yeah.
Actually, ferries are what I'm training for. So.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Perfect. You would be the perfect person to get them over, across Huckleberry Ferry.
I don't have the hands-on training yet, but if there's a fire or something big falls down on one of them and traps one of them, or breaks their limbs, I can handle things.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Good. Excellent. You're really into this to the point that you're like, I am going to immerse myself in the story so much that each chapter I'm going to become an occupation that will help the heroes through their journey. Well done.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So yeah, today we're talking chapter 5 of book 1, A Conspiracy Unmasked.
Yeah, and thankfully it'll be quite some time before we reach the charge of the Rohirrims, so that I can learn how to do horseback riding and sword and spear fighting.
That's me. Now it's been a while, but my childhood up through, let's say, high school, I did a lot of horseback riding.
Oh, that's cool.
Shows and that kind of stuff, like jumping. I could do. I mean, I was terrified, but I did it. So let's just say I wouldn't be like leading the Rohirrim, but I'd be like, all right, sure, I'll jump in. So what we got from Mark? French. I had this school for a couple of years. One day, my French teacher saw me going to the cinema. The next day, without prior notice, what was that I had to give a review of the movie in French. Oh God. Oh, that is nightmarish, Mark.
For you, maybe, Mark, but I love it.
No, this is since we're doing this little thing, and I mentioned my trip to Belgium. So my host's father was trying to hey, I'm gonna mention something you probably know about, and he was so convinced that he was speaking English, but it was like undecipherable English to me. So he's like, Stilo. And then so in my head, I'm like, Stilo, like a pen? What are we talking about? I don't understand. What are you asking? Stilo. And he was getting kind of upset. Like his face started to get red. He's like, Stilo. And it took a while. I finally figured out what he was trying to say is, do you know Star Wars? And anyway, minutes went by where I was sitting looking stupid, and I'm sure he was like, why is this guy so stupid? He doesn't know Star Wars. But I didn't know Stilo. That was my problem.
Yeah. Anyways, good story. We'll revisit it, of course.
That's right.
But so we start on page 98 of the Red Book edition, at least for me.
129 for my edition, the Harper Collins. I
got you that edition.
Yeah,
years and years ago. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll mention this. Just one fun thing here about Chapter 5 is to me is that it begins this series of chapters that are typically left out of Lord of the Rings adaptations. Last chapter we dealt with Farmer Maggot, seeing the Black Riders on the road. And we see versions of that in Peter Jackson's trilogy and Ralph Bakshi's animated film. And Chapter 9 gets us to Bree, and that's where the adaptations usually pick back up. But chapters 5, 6, 7, 8, 5, 6, 7, 8, those are these really cool chapters that are, why do they get cut out? For time, for conservation of characters, I guess. Like the characters that our heroes meet probably aren't that relevant after Chapter 8. I think even the BBC Lord of the Rings radio series cuts out these chapters. But, I'd love to see them depicted at some time. But for our purposes, what makes Chapter 5 unique in this way is that it begins this fairly long sequence, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's really only available to book readers. And so, anyway, there's something really cool about that.
Yeah, and it's another reason why people should remember that the Book of Lord of the Rings is king. And now I've heard more and more people saying, well, I've seen the movies. I don't need to read the book ever. And I think I will repeat what Christopher Lee once said: read the book. And Lee was probably the biggest Lord of the Rings geek on that set. So, and
that and Viggo Mortensen's son. Apparently, that's how Viggo got the part, or was interested in the part. Was his son saw that he was potentially up for Aragorn? He's like, "Whoa, Aragorn!" And Viggo didn't necessarily, but his son was so excited about it. He's like, "Whoa, okay, yes, let's take a look at this." So,
yep.
Well done, Viggo Mortensen's son. Is my point.
Yeah. Now let's see. Now Merry leads them onto the ferry, or at least he seems to be taking the situation in hand on page 98, which I really like. Now, right there, we have one major difference between the films and the book here, because in the films, Merry is basically Lou Costello. I don't know. He's a bumbling buffoon. But in the book, he is, I would argue, an Aragorn hobbit of sorts. Like, he's the hobbit's answer to Aragorn. He's confident, he's competent, and he's just, honestly, he's one of my favorite hobbits. He's just such a great hero. And you want the job done no matter what, Merry is your hobbit. Like, if they were in a video game, he'd be the one with the most balanced stats. Like
the jack of all trades, you're saying. Okay.
Yeah. And yet he's also, I would argue, the best warrior of all of them. And
okay, yeah. I got you. Of the hobbits.
Yeah, of the hobbits. And he's got the most level head as well. Sam can get a little swept up by emotion, despite being very reasonable. Frodo is very wise, but he's weighed down by the ring. And Pippin is a fool of a took.
All you had to mention was took.
Well, I don't know. Bilbo had tookish blood in him.
That's true.
Brilliant.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
He's a half fool of a took.
Yes. Now, later in the paragraphs, we are introduced to the lore of. I just made a quick note to read this paragraph. I really like it. Long ago, Gorhindad, old Buck, head of the old Buck family, one of the oldest in the Marsh, or indeed in the Shire, had crossed the river which was the original boundary of the land eastwards. He built and excavated Brandy Hall, changed his name to Brandybuck, and settled down to become master of what was virtually a small independent country. His family grew and grew, and after his days continued to grow until Brandy Hall occupied the whole of the low hill and had 3 large front doors, many side doors, and about 100 windows. The Brandybucks and their numerous dependents had begun to burrow and later to build all round about. That was the origin of the Buckland. Oh, of Buckland, not the Buckland. A thickly inhabited strip between the river and the old forest, a sort of colony from the Shire. Its chief village was Bucklebury, clustering in the banks and slopes behind Brandy Hall. Now, what I love here is all the lore here, because, the editor of our upcoming anthology book once said that, he recently told us in an editorial meeting that the thing about the Silmarillion is that it's all the background lore that the biggest Lord of the Rings geeks and nerds love ever so much more than what's in the foreground. And this is the sort of lore that, honestly, I think many of the Silmarillion fanboys and fangirls, to be fair to Girl Next Gondor and all of her ilk, love so much, is that this sort of lore, it helps deepen the Shire. Because in The Hobbit, we got a lot of information. All the information we could possibly get from such a small tome. But here, this is building on that. And in a lot of ways, I think what some people forget and what scares some people from this book is that Lord of the Rings is littered with lore like this, where Tolkien will kind of break the narrative to go tell you the history of this area or something. And Howard tended to do the same thing. And oftentimes I've seen people, especially fantasy writers of today, argue this is a weak point of theirs. But I actually think this is a strong point of theirs. The lore and the world has a personality all its own. And you need to build that in order to build your characters as well, and to build just everything in your book. So I really do love that paragraph. Perhaps one of my favorites of this entire chapter.
And just a simple paragraph over a detail that might seem inconsequential can really help define a character.
Yeah, because this is defining Merry Brandybuck. And he is heir to this. Let's be honest, this is a castle, not or at least some
kind of manor house or something. Yeah.
I think it's supposed to be modeled after a moat in Bailey Anglo-Saxon.
Oh, I got like a keep or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a foothill, hill fort. I mean.
Well, and I gotta mention the importance really of this location as we start this chapter. We're on the Brandywine River, and ahead of them they can see the lights of Brandy Hall. So
yeah,
this is the river on which Frodo's parents drowned while boating at night, no less. Surely that's got to be some kind of triggering event for Frodo. I'm sure he doesn't spend a lot of time on this river, and being here at night on the ferry probably is somehow it brings up those memories. And then after he was orphaned, where did Frodo live before he eventually ended up living with Bilbo? He lived at Brandy Hall. So he's looking at the building. He's sailing towards this building, which is where he spent his days as an orphan due to this river. I don't know. Like there's a lot I would think going on there. And of course, as you mentioned, Merry is going to eventually live in Brandy Hall for a time after the war. And so there's a lot. This area has a lot of importance for our group. So that's really cool.
It's kind of like the hill that Aragorn guides the hobbits to. That has a lot of importance with him.
Right.
And Beren and Luthien has a lot of importance to him. Even Gil-galad. So it's that sort of detail that Tolkien is. It's a small thread. He's slipping under the surface, and it's something to pay attention to. And the people in the Marish were friendly with the Bucklanders, and apparently the master of the hall, who is the head of the Brandybuck family, which is a vast family. I'll actually call it a clan. It's more a clan than it is a family. As you have, technically, Frodo is part Brandybuck.
Yeah, so it's an extended family, right.
Yeah, and Dan and I, for example, come from a large French family like that, which has a huge amount of tendrils all the way in Quebec and France, and even I think in a bit of Asia. Apparently, our family is actually called a clan because it's one of the. We have all. I think the most common surname in the Francosphere. I think, or one of them, because apparently our ancestors were very fertile.
Because
so I do kind of understand. This is something I can actually kind of relate to, given the nature of our clan. And
because in our hometown, there were two branches of our family.
Yeah, but they were both related to each other distantly, very distantly. So, because whenever I go, I'm not asked, "Do you belong to that family?" It's, "Oh, you're a member of that clan."
Interesting.
It's
now, see, my particular background is such that really no two members of my family live in the same place. There was a lot of service industry folks, soldiers. I had pastors, clergy folk, and then teachers, and they all there's people in California and people in here in Illinois, people in Georgia, people, Indiana. And so I've always kind of had a bit of a little longing for like a Shire type environment type of thing. Cause it's just something that I really haven't had in that way.
Yeah. I just mentioned because wherever, no matter what French place we go to in Canada or in France, apparently you'll find a member of our family.
Wow. Very nice.
It's that large. And apparently numbers in, I think, like the tens of
Well, you need
thousands.
to get a hill fort, apparently. Go,
Yeah.
you know, I want to.
Yeah.
That'd be
We'll
some
call-
cool filming there. It'd be like, all right, live from the hill fort. It's the brothers Krynn / Arda.
Yeah. But now most of the Shire apparently regard the Bucklanders as peculiar and almost foreign. But that itself, we've gotten a good impression of that from earlier in the book, as Merry's been treated rather like he doesn't belong in the old Shire. And yet he frequently goes there and visits there and laughs at those who tell him he doesn't belong. Merry has thick skin, and I think part of him not belonging in the Shire to an extent as the heir of of Brandy Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's part of the reason him and Aragorn formed the quickest friendship between Aragorn and the hobbits, because they're both kind of outsiders, even amongst their kin and their kindred and whatnot, and the people. Although that said, Aragorn also takes rather quickly to Frodo, of course, but Frodo himself, I think another reason why Frodo gets along so well with Aragorn and Merry is for the same reason. And now Frodo not seeming like he belongs is partly due to Bilbo, because Bilbo was such a odd took of a Baggins.
Well, you know, there's part of the chapter here mentions that one of the reasons the Brandybucks are looked at as strange is their affinity for water. Right? So they live on the Brandywine River. They apparently, it says, some of them even swim. And so that suggests to me a connection to the Stewards, right? So the Smeagol's folk. So, you know, they're the three branches of Hobbitdom, which have all kind of melded together here in the Shire, but the Stewards, the Fallowhides, and the Harfoots. And of course, the Stewards live near the Anduin River. You know, Smeagol is swimming when he finds the ring. And so here I think we see perhaps whatever, like a stronger Stewardish strain in the Brandybucks than perhaps in other sections of Hobbitdom.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, Frodo is and Gollum or Smeagol are mirror images of each other, but arguably, so same with, I think each of the hobbits are characters who should be juxtaposed with Smeagol, because they each have one aspect of him, the stoorishness and the propensity for violence, where of Gollum is a marked contrast to Merry basically being a knight in a way, as he's pretty much knighted by Theoden, and thus takes up a more, like, the ideal of chivalry is that you're a defensive warrior. You'd fight only in defense of those you love and of your country and your people. That is the whole idea behind chivalry and Bushido. But Merry represents those ideals. This is a marked contrast to Gollum, who will kill dishonorably and do horrible deeds of violence against those around him. So
we have a question here from David.
Oh, thanks for keeping an eye on the chat there for me.
Yeah. He's asking, how much of Hobbits do we think is based on real places or persons in time? Tolkien definitely used a lot of his personal surroundings, you know, when it came to naming people, for instance. And like I was just writing, actually, I did this Father Christmas Letters video recently, and it's somewhat tangentially related. So the original Frodo's original name in early drafts was Bingo. He's Bingo Baggins, and Bingo was the name of his daughter's teddy bear, and so you know he was using this thing that was, hey, Bingo has some relevance to me and to my family. I'm going to name this character Bingo Baggins. So things like that, I think, definitely entered the story. Put it that way.
But the thing with him is, I think there was some influence from the TCBS, his group of friends who died in World War I. And I also think that there's now this, I've said it before, but I do think that there's, or at least have the suspicion that there's some influence from Mark Twain in regards to Pippin and Merry, his personalities, and even Sam a little, because in Mark Twain's memoir of Jeanne d'Arc, you have a Sam type character, Louis de Comte, I think it is. You have a character who's boastful and a bit of a fool, the Paladin, whom Pippin has a lot in common with, and you have the slyer, more clever Noel, who has a lot in common with Mary. So Tolkien, I think, was drawing from literary sources, but also personal people he's met, loved ones, and whatnot. But now,
I also kind of thought that, when we talk about the Tooks are obviously, we just brought them up. They're somewhat instrumental in our story. Tolkien puts a special prominence on that family and how odd they are and how they don't quite fit in. But then some of our heroes are really, have a strong relation to the Tooks. And the Took and Tolkien, I don't know if there's a little bit, I feel like he's putting himself a little bit, perhaps his family life into what we get with Bilbo and Frodo and such. One thing, I remember when he talked about the old Took, Gerontius Took, I think in one of his letters he mentioned that he was kind of thinking about his own grandparents who lived very old, and he wanted to have like this really old patriarch that was of the Took family. So again, he's putting his own family into these characters a little bit.
He's interweaving them a little. Friends and family, like Lewis's Treebeard, he's interweaving them in there, but he's also altering and mythologizing them in a way. There's also Harold Harefoot, a Mercian king. Yeah, Tolkien obviously drew from Anglo-Saxon and even some Celtic and Nordic history. I'll just skip down to here. This is what we were saying. So we also get another look at the Nazgul on the next page, where, but this is the first time Mary sees them, and so he points them out, or at least the large dark figure who's behind them, who's crawling and crouching, but just past the lamps, and Mary, of course, takes a bit of fright at that, and Frodo tells him to hurry it up because he does not want to be anywhere near the bank when the Nazgul gets near. And of course, the Nazgul will have to be delayed because he doesn't like water. So he has to go 10 miles north to Brandywine Bridge, which is quite the delay. And now I don't know miles as much because we weren't raised on that system. We were raised on a metric system.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, a horse maybe could travel you could ask a horse maybe travel 20 miles or something in a day. Like 10 miles is going to be that's hours and hours.
Yeah.
To have to go around and then come 10 miles back. So you are talking 20 miles essentially.
Yeah. So he's not going to have a fun time. He's going to be probably steaming mad by the time he gets there, and it'll be too late. So this is where the hobbits have had the last laugh for the moment. Now, of course, it's still some distance from the Brandywine to Frodo's new home at Crickhollow.
If I could mention one thing in there on the river crossing. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, sir.
Go ahead.
But I thought it was interesting. As they're crossing the river, we experienced the ferry ride not through Frodo, but which would makes some sense, that remembering his parents or something. But we're experiencing it through Sam, and I think the line is Sam was the only member of the party who had not been over the river before. He had a strange feeling as the slow, gurgling stream slipped by. His old life lay behind in the mists. Dark adventure lay in front. He scratched his head and for a moment had a passing wish that Mr. Frodo could have gone on living quietly at Bag End. And so, I think Tolkien is focusing on Sam in this moment because his fears are about the future, the story's future. Whereas Frodo, say, lamenting about his parents or something like that would be a little more exposition looking backwards. And so it's just interesting the choices that Tolkien is making here to say, like, no, in this moment, I'm going to focus on Sam and his reaction to crossing this river into parts unknown, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. And we also have David, who's doing an interesting experiment, just plotting the Hobbits' route on a real map, starting in Wales. Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Oh, speaking of maps, let me show this real fast. This is a Christmas gift I got from my wife. I don't know if it'll fit too well. It's going to go on the wall behind me there. That little triptych thing you see is actually, you can't really see it that well, but it's artwork of various locations in Middle-earth, like Rivendell and Lothlorien. And this I'm going to put over the top. There we go. Anyway, it's a map of the Shire.
Yeah,
so in fact, somewhere in there is there's Buckland and our Brandywine River, and there's Buckleberry Ferry. Anyway, so pretty awesome gift. My wife's awesome, and you'll see this in years, months to come. Will be up on the wall behind me.
Yeah, whoops! Accidentally booted myself out of my own stream.
You fell off the ferry.
Yeah, I did. It seems
we were in hot water.
Yeah, sorry about that. But anyways, that map looks delightful. Bullroar, yeah, obviously, yeah. Thomas.
Oh, he's talking about the hedge could be Offa's Dyke. Yeah. Good call.
Oh, yeah, a
defensive boundary. Yep.
I would love to see that dike.
I took a trip. It was 2006 or so, and I ended up going to Ludlow Castle, which beautiful ruin. But it's on the marches, so it was one of the castles of the Marcher Lords, which are basically just the boundary castles that were keeping the Welsh away from the English. And so it's really interesting. Anyway, it's great to look at, but the history is really cool too.
And until Edward I went and planted castles.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. They said, well, we don't have to sit back here. We can go there.
Yep.
Okay. So David said he's biased a bit as he used to live nearby. Oh wow.
Well, yeah, but you should be biased. And I'll even go so far as to say I've never lived in France, but I'm biased towards the French. I'm also biased towards the Scots, but I've never been to Scotland. But because we have come from a Franco-Scottish-Irish family, we're biased towards those cultures.
Mostly Germanic in my case, but yeah. I'm biased there. So there you go. Yeah. Took a trip on the Rhine River 2 Christmases ago. It was awesome.
Keep being cool, Matt. So let's see. Now for the Rhine of the Shire. They're basically floating along, and then they end up having to go some distance to Crickhollow, passing by Buck Hill and Brandy Hall on their left, apparently, and I'm reading directly here. And they end up making it there, but there's, let me see. But once there, they decide to have, a bath. Now, this is where we have a moment where we see how great Mary is, because Mary predicted that they'd want a bath when they got to Crickhollow. But for that reason, he didn't just set up one bath. He set up 4. And though there are about 5, this speeds things up quite a bit for the hobbits. And it just shows how he does plan for everything.
Well, also just to have hot water in like 3 different giant bathtubs. That's not easy at this time. And this, what would be this time if you were to put it in a real world context. I mean, that's a real gift, right? To be able to say like, you're going to get a hot bath. Like, what? Okay. Yes, please. I mean, anyway, so it's kind of this really nice, it's almost this luxury that they get before they have to set out to the old forest or whatever. So, yeah, it's not to be overlooked. Like, oh, they just had a nice bath. Like, oh, no, wow, okay. Pretty special.
Yeah, except for optional, someone who's been commenting a little regularly lately on Brothers Arda Nice to have you. He says, hope you all seen the Journeys of Frodo Atlas by Barbara Strachey. I don't know how to pronounce that. Very cool breakdown of every day on the map.
Okay, I don't think I've seen the that particular map, but that sounds like something I should reach out for. That does sound like a good pictorial thing that I would appreciate.
Yeah, sounds cool. Gotta check that out.
All right, so Mark apparently lives 30 kilometers away from the Rhine. All right, I just threw the Rhine out there, and I've got folks living there. Okay, there we go. Small world, small, large world is what this is. Right now, I live just 100 yards from the Chicago River. Anybody? No one? Okay.
No.
The big claim to fame for the Chicago River, I'll just throw this out there. If you ever take like a tour of the Chicago River, and there are lots of them, one of the first things the tour guide's going to tell you is, hey, we did this thing. We had too much waste coming down the river into Chicago, so the engineers did what you would normally do. Would you just clean up the river? No. No. You reverse the flow of the river and you send the trash to St. Louis. That's the big engineering achievement of the Chicago River. Now, in years since, we've done a little more cleaning. But at the time, it was like, let's just reverse the flow of the river. That would be easier. And so they freaking did. And to this day, the river flows opposite from the way that it originally flowed for that reason. But there you go. So I don't think they did that with the Brandywine. Maybe. No. I don't know. Little Hobbit engineers.
And we get Pippin, who sings a Bath song. Sing hey for the bath at close of day that washes the weary and mud away. A loon is he that will not sing. Oh, water hot is a noble thing. Oh, sweet is the sound of falling rain and the brook that leaps from hill to plain. But better than rain or rippling streams is water hot that smokes in streams.
Hot water.
It seems, oh, water cold we may pour at need down a thirsty throat and be glad indeed. But better is beer if drink we lack and water hot poured down the back. Oh, water's fair that leaps on high in a fountain white beneath the sky. But never did fountain sound so sweet as splashing hot water with my feet.
Yeah, it's like a little nursery rhyme, but it goes to the point that, yeah, it's like a luxury item. Having hot water on demand, pretty awesome. And yeah. So they've of course hobbits have come up with a song for something that is that comforting.
What's also interesting is that it was it's a rhyme from Bilbo, and that shows that he also had a bit of a hand in, I guess, kind of raising Pippin to an extent, or at least had some influence over him. And that should let us know also that these are legacy characters, I guess you could say. I'm going to use a D&D term. These are like the first generation hero in his family, so to speak, was Bilbo. The next generation are these four, or five if you count Fatty. So this is a very, very interesting. Like Tolkien keeps doing that in Lord of the Rings. He keeps reminding us that Bilbo was there first, and these are kind of his heirs. I guess you could say in a classic Greek mythological sense, or Norse mythological sense, in that the torch of heroism has been passed down a generation.
Well, and I'm sure you'll get to it here in just a second, but we're also going to see how Merry, sees Bilbo using the ring.
Yep.
But that's because he's hanging around Bilbo a lot, right? He's in the same environs, and he knows Bilbo enough to follow him and see, oh, there comes the Sackville Baggins. Oh, I bet something's going to happen. So he's obviously, well acquainted with Bilbo as well.
Yeah, and he reveals on
the fifth Hobbit, exactly, Mark. Poor old Frediger. Anyway,
I gotta also put the image back up, because that image is really key to what's going on.
Yeah, awesome.
Yep, thank you. We can't keep forgetting about the fifth Hobbit. Yeah, I'm going to leave this up for a moment because too often people forget about him. And honestly, Freddie is such a champ. I really like Freddie.
Yeah. I mean, I did a video on him a while back, but until I did the video, I hadn't really thought about all the ways he affects the story behind the scenes, but he does. He's a
champ.
really one of those like subtle guys that actually does a whole lot, and it has a heroic arc in the story.
In a way, he's comparable to Sir Bedivere in Arthuriana, because so you've got, let's say, Lancelot or Mordred, should I blank on?
We're talking Percival, or
you have Lancelot and Mordred, who are really the villains of the tale. But you have Percival, Gawain, Sir Kay. These are the more front and center knights who are sexier.
It's funny. I never really thought of Lancelot as the villain, but I hear your point. Okay. Yep.
And the thing is, these are the heroic characters who set out on these quests to help maidens, help orphans, to help everyone they really can. Same with Sir Gaheris.
Gaheris, yeah, the brothers.
Sir Garrett. All these knights are more front and center. But Bedivere is a scribe in some depictions at Arthur's roundtable meetings. And he plays a very important role in Malt Dalciel and in other versions of the story. So Freddie really plays a role like Sir Bedivere. And the best depiction of Sir Bedivere, though, in modern cinema has been in Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail, of course.
It's the movie I've probably watched more than any other. I revealed too much there, but yeah, there was a time when I could pretty much quote that movie 100%. Like from the first line to the last line, I could quote the entire friggin' movie. But yes, gotcha.
Where'd you find the coconuts?
Terry Jones, baby, exactly.
He was perfect. Anyways,
perhaps if we built a large wooden badger. Anyway,
yeah. Anyways, now Mary reveals that he's seen the ring after revealing the conspiracy, and that Sam was really the one to kind of start it. No, wait, that's after this, but he reveals the conspiracy and reveals how he learned of the ring. And how he did so was that he saw Bilbo at one point a year before the party and went to say hello, but then saw Bilbo vanish because the Sackville Bagginses were kind of coming along and Bilbo didn't feel like dealing with them. And the thing is, Mary got curious afterwards and then went snooping around Bilbo's book, which technically we call that breaking and entering, but in Hobbit terms, we call that just being curious and inquisitive. And the thing is, I'm joking there when I say breaking and entering. But on the other hand, there's another similarity between Mary and Gollum, in that Mary does do some sneaking around and does that to discover secrets and knowledge, much as Gollum did millennia ago. So there's an interesting link there. And on the other hand, Mary is the only other Hobbit, I think, other than Frodo and Bilbo, to have read from that book of Bilbo's. And I really like that he went around snooping it. And then he even admits that, I wonder what became of it. I should like another look. Have you got it, Frodo? And Frodo tells him, no, it was not at Bag End. He must have taken it away. And, of course, when Mary kept the knowledge to himself until the spring when things got serious, and then they formed a conspiracy. And anyone who must have known about it or suspected it would be called conspiracy theorists in the Shire. I'm joking. I have to crack these jokes. But the thing is, well, it was Sam who really ended up being the chief investigator into what Frodo was up to. And that shows a slyness and a cunning on Sam's part that he doesn't really advertise too much.
What's great too, though, is, when, so the bit when we first meet him in a way is when, Gandalf accuses him of spying. He's like, I was just doing the hedges. And here we get proof. No, he was spying. Like Gandalf was absolutely right. He was trying to eavesdrop on their conversation, and his whole thing of like, I was just doing the hedges. I don't know what you're talking about. No, that guy he was snooping, which is great. I think it's a fun little character trait, a little moment for Sam there.
Well, Sam's always snooping. He's just one of those people. I like to think that that's something that he had in common with quite a few people in Tolkien's life. Anyways, we have, is Lobelia already ransacking Bag End for Bilbo's treasure? I probably think she is.
Oh yeah, no, I think definitely, right? They were already talking to Frodo about the house right before he was leaving. So I'm sure as soon as the house was vacated, they're in knocking on walls, doing what they can to find the secret treasure.
I mean, Lobelia is essentially the female version of Golem.
That's an interesting parallel. Here's Mark is comparing Fredegar to Círdan, which I kind of like, actually. He mentions it's because there's great events, he wasn't front and center, but also because Círdan stays behind. Like Círdan is the one who doesn't go to the west. He instead is facilitating others to do so, and that's what Fredegar ends up doing here. Is he doesn't go east, he's facilitating the others to go. So there's a bit of a parallel there too, I would say. If I were writing an essay, that's how I might connect those dots.
Oh, I also just remembered. Let me find it. I'm just looking for one quick line. I just remembered. I made a note of it.
I'll tell you what. While you're looking, I'll read one that maybe it's the one you're looking for. But I think it's interesting for what we've heard and what's coming in the next couple of chapters. We hear about Farmer Maggot, and they're like, so far we've been given nothing more to go on than Farmer Maggot's guess that it has something to do with old Bilbo's treasure. That was only a guess, said Frodo hastily. Maggot does not know anything. Old Maggot is a shrewd fellow, said Merry. A lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out as talk. I've heard he used to go into the old forest at one time, and he has the reputation of knowing a many good, strange things. So we're going to hear later that Tom Bombadil knows of this guy. So, yes, he indeed has gone into the old forest and apparently met the denizens therein. So there's a little more about Farmer Maggot than just guy who chases people away from his mushrooms.
Oh, right. Right. It's, I think, when Pippin goes to tell the tale, I think. Oh, right. It's around there that I just remembered there's a typo regarding meaning and meaningful.
Oh, okay.
Where I just happened to notice it on page 103 of the Red Book edition. And I thought that was actually funny to find a typo, given how thorough Tolkien was about keeping typos out, but apparently one of them slipped past him. And I do know it's a typo. So it's just, it's one of those little details that just made me laugh, as I know he'd be shrieking.
Right.
The thought that something slipped him by. And slipped past Christopher, because Christopher was probably history's greatest editor. And nothing really slipped past him.
And of course, being the Frenchman you are, you'd want to notify him just to see how he'd react.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. David's asking, are we doing Bombadil today or later? Yeah, that's going to be in chapters to come. The Old Forest, and then Tom, and then so basically 6, 7, 8 is when we're going to get into Bombadildom. So coming next time on. But for today, it's chapter 5. So we get them all the way to when they start to set out. They're setting out on their journey to the Old Forest.
Yep. And we see Farmer Maggot as a figure, a scary adult type figure to the eyes of the child hobbits. Yeah. We touched on that last time. Thanks for the refresher, Mark. Appreciate it. And we have
scribal error, right? I agree, Zephyr. Probably not an error on behalf of the professor.
Well, I think it.
I mean, it could be.
It could be, but I think I don't hold it against him. I just thought it was a charming quirk.
Gotcha.
And
Yep.
I just thought, well, it just adds to the charm of the good old professor. And I imagine if Jack Lewis was around, he'd have a good laugh about it. And, like, happens to the best of us, even the good professor. But the good professor comes the closest, along with his son, to perfection when it comes where the English language is concerned. Let's see. So now the reason for the conspiracy, as we all know, is fear for Frodo's sake.
And it's great too. This thing of we see from Frodo's eyes this almost like a sense of impending doom. Like, oh, this last night. I'm gonna have to tell them tonight. I got to tell them what's happening, and that I'm leaving. And I don't want to do it. I just want to enjoy, this meal with my friends. And I'm just dreading this moment that I have to say this stuff. And then we get this turnabout, which is like, yeah, no, we knew the whole time. There's a ring. You're being followed. And by the way, you're not going alone. We're going to go with you. So let's keep partying, whatever. It's a fun little turnabout there where he goes from this sense of, I have to carry this by myself to, oh, no, the whole time we're in on this. So get ready. We're coming with you.
Yeah, he's, I'll just make two other literary references, though they're from disparate historic fiction books. He dreaded being Robert Bruce in the West Isles from Tolkien and from the Robert the Bruce novel by Nigel Tranter, but instead he finds himself Jeanne d'Arc from Mark Twain's book, who's surrounded by friends when she goes to Aquitaine. So, to Chinon. So, he imagined he'd be Bruce in the wilderness with no one, but instead he finds himself Jeanne in this situation. And of course, we have on the following page, they finally win over Frodo and inform him in no uncertain terms that they're going to be following him no matter what. And of course, Merry and Pippin take to singing. And you know what? You could read the song this time.
All right, I'll do this one. So this is a cool one. Merry and Pippin began a song which they had apparently got ready for the occasion. So they're all ready. They're like, what up? We know this is coming. We practiced. We rehearsed. It was made in the model of the dwarf song that started Bilbo on his adventure long ago and went to the same tune. Farewell, we call to hearth and hall. The wind may blow and rain may fall. We must away ere break of day. Far over wood and mountain tall, to Rivendell, where elves yet dwell, in glades beneath the misty fell. Through moor and waste we ride in haste, and whither then we cannot tell. With foes ahead, behind us dread, beneath the sky shall be our bed, until at last our toil be past, our journey done, our errand sped. We must away, we must away. We ride before the break of day. Heroic, get them going. That's right. It's inspirational pep talk poem.
It also reminds me of, real quick, of the poem much later of Arise, arise, riders of Theoden, fell deep awake, fire and slaughter, spear shall be shaken, shield be splintered, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises, ride now, ride to Gondor. And it's just the part about sped, the third verse there, and the last one remind me of the Theoden poem.
I got you. And there's that thing, we ride before the break of day. So there's that ride now, there's this call to action in it.
Yeah. And that's something that I do like about some of those, some of these certain poems, the ones that are just before an action. Tolkien uses poetry to, as you said, call to action on the part of his characters. And it also, like, how do I put it? Each poem shows an aspect of the character. This is something I think we noted before, but you look at Pippin when he sings that nursery rhyme about bathing, we get the insight that Pippin's a very innocent child hobbit in a way at this point in the story. Now he will grow to be a ferocious warrior later and a hero, but right now he's a child. Here we see the warrior archetype of Merry and Pippin, who will go on to become warriors. And you look at, say, my favorite poem, The Riders of Theoden, that's showing us the resolve of the Rohirrim and what they're about to do. They're about to ride now to the rescue of Gondor. And it's also, in the Nordic custom, the death poem of Theoden, because some Norse warriors in ancient times would compose a poem and chant it out before they'd ride to their doom. And or so when it goes the theory. And this is really Theoden's doom poem in a way. I've
brought this up in previous videos, but it is one of the things that I feel like Ralph Bakshi's movie got right, because they quoted the thing verbatim, and Peter Jackson for some reason decided not to do the verbatim quote for Theoden, but it's when Theoden says in the book and in the Ralph Bakshi bit, when it seems like the odds are against them at Helm's Deep, Gandalf has yet to arrive, and he says, perhaps we can make such an end as will be worth a song. And I'm like, whoa. And then Jackson changed it to say, perhaps we can make such an end as will be worth remembrance. I'm like, no. Worth a song is a lot more meaningful to this kind of Anglo-Saxon based culture than worth remembrance. Like, there's gonna be a song sung about us. We will live on in this, people will sing about us. That's a big deal. That I feel like it's a little touch, but I was waiting for it in the Jackson movie because I knew it was coming. And then when it was like remember, it's like, he didn't do the song bit anyway. But so similar to what you're talking about. Hey, we're about to do this really impactful thing. At least there will be a song about this.
Yeah, I really like what David said here. I fully agree. I love Aragorn's speeches, but that one of Theoden's always sticks with me.
Yep.
But I also think, like, if you look at, I think what's also interesting is that there's a certain poem or song that I find that most people associate with a certain given character. With Samwise, I find it's the Song of Gil-galad, where we see there the longing and the wistfulness and the sorrow of the elves, but also the wistfulness for a more romantic time on Samwise's part, for that romantic kingly hero. On Aragorn's end, though him and Arwen are in no way comparable to Luthien and Beren in terms of the grandeur, or at least that's probably how they would think, because he's a far humbler sort than what many readers might be. I'm not mocking the readers. I'm just meaning like how they imagine it. Like,
sure.
Aragorn would not say he's the next Baron, but he is. But he'd probably say he's just Strider. But the thing, because he's a humble guy. But the thing is, the Beren and Luthien song being sung by Aragorn tells us deep down, despite having lived so long and suffered so much and having had to share his bed, in the words of Uther Pendragon in one adaptation of King Arthur, had to share his bed with a sword rather than the woman he loves. And yet Aragorn remains a romantic, a fierce believer that all of his sacrifices and years of pain, sorrow, and loneliness are worth it, because he'll get his Luthien in the end. He will be with her. And the songs are key to the characters.
I got you. Yeah. No, they're little windows into their backstory, their personality, their hopes and wishes. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I know that a lot of armies, when they'd march, one thing they'd do is they'd sing songs.
At least like 1,000 years ago. Yeah.
I think even today, I mean, you have marching songs for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I just mean it was more prevalent in I still listen to weirdly French Crusader songs because they're pretty good.
Okay, fair enough.
And a few of them are even mocking of their Crusader leaders, and it's pretty interesting how they would do
Sure,
that.
there's kind of like a gallows humor that can come into some of those things as well, where they're kind of a dark
Sometimes
humor of like,
they-
hey, well, you might very well die.
Sometimes they sing about a woman worth fighting for.
That's just a Mulan movie, Dan. But you're too fond of that scene.
Oh, come on.
It's probably the weakest song in that movie.
Wait, which
But-
movie are we talking about?
Mulan.
Mulan. Okay,
Yeah, I like that song, but it's the weakest.
all right,
Yeah.
fair enough.
I'll make a man out of you, and reflections are the best. Anyways, and I am
So
biased.
just to go back to we were talking about Frediger and how awesome he is. We get this whole thing where they're talking about, oh, we're going to the old forest, and he's like, what? No, it's interesting because he's very scared of the old forest and the stories he's heard, but it's already been preordained that he's staying behind. So it's not like I was gonna go with you, but now I'm not. He's just very worried for the sake that that's the route you guys are gonna take. Wow. But Fred, his job is to. It sounds crazy when you really start thinking about like you. I mean, what does it even say? It says, okay, so his job is to stay at Crick Hollow and keep up as long as possible the pretense that Mr. Baggins was still living at Crick Hollow. He'd even brought along some old clothes of Frodo's to help him in playing the part. They little thought how dangerous that part might prove. So he's going to put on Frodo's clothes, walk around, be seen at the windows. I'm Frodo, Black Riders. Look at me. I'm defenseless here in this house. Basically trying to, he's bait. And so, wow, that's just it's a bold move. And again, I'm going to give the clap to Fred for being like, yeah, no, fine. I'll be the bait for a bunch of Black Riders that'll come and maybe kill me in my sleep. Like that's a big ask.
And that's why Macaulay Culkin is the perfect casting for Freddy.
Okay, fair enough.
From
Right.
Home
He's
Alone.
going to put up the little cardboard cutout in front of the window, and then he'll have the Christmas songs playing. Then he'll have like a bunch of marbles, and he'll heat up something like a horseshoe that'll swing across the entrance and smack him in the face.
Don't forget
Spiders.
the paint cans.
That's awesome. That would be great. The Frediger Bolger Home Alone movie where Frediger traps the house against the Black Riders. Woo! Yep. I'd watch it. I would.
Definitely review it.
Yep. But
you get him, and he does. I mean, he doesn't trap the house, but he survives. His because
he's awesome.
It works. He survives. He sends out the alarm. We're gonna find out later that because he resists Saruman / Sharky during the Scouring of the Shire, he gets imprisoned to the point that he is starved so much as a prisoner that he can no longer go by the nickname because he's lost all of his weight due to starvation in prison. And he survives long enough to then crack a joke about it at the very end when he gets out. So hats off. If I had a hat, hats off to Frediger Bolger.
Yep. And honestly, he's one of the most important characters in the background and in the Shire, as you rightly.
Oh, and also, just throw it out there, we find out his sister, Estella, marries Mary. So he's connected to Mary through marriage eventually.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that. I forgot about that detail. What's also interesting, real quick, as a throwaway thing, is that apparently Mary and Freddie Fatty, decorated Crick Hollow to look like Bag End.
Nice touch, right? They didn't have to do that.
Yeah. On the one hand, it shows that they're very kindly, and they obviously are also very competent. It shows different layers. There's the competency, there's the warmth, but there's also, I think, thematically, from a motif perspective, Frodo still has not left home, really. Now, the call of adventure has come along, and to speak in Campbellian terms, he's still not answered it. Now, he technically is saying he is, but he's not yet stepped onto the road. So he's left Bag End for Crick Hollow. He's still technically at home in a way, despite being away from his original home. But it's the departure from Crick Hollow that signals the start of the journey, really, into the unknown and into the wilderness, as one might put it. And this is honestly a very important detail, I think. And Tolkien is deliberately kind of copying the Bag End home here into Crick Hollow, I think for the purpose of a motif.
Yeah, right. I agree. It's still part of the familiar. It's still, he's still got the comforts of home. He's about to set out, as you say, into the unknown, into the forest, which, a trope, a common trope of, the fairy tale, which is the forest. That's where change happens. That's where chaos is. That's where your comforts of home disappear. And that's where chapter 6 is the old forest.
Yeah, and I can't help but make a comparison to in World War II, there were men that had to stay behind in London to make sure that there was a home worth going to, whereas you had others going to war, but it was also dangerous in London with the London bombings.
Yeah, and we also call those men cowards. I'm joking. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
What are you doing here, Joe?
No, I'm joking. I'm only joking. Actually,
people had to watch the home front.
Yeah,
for sure.
But a lot of the men were serving also in, like, a lot of the men were serving in the in code breaking and whatnot. But we also got to bear in mind that a lot of these men, in a lot of cases, did eventually ship out because a lot of the wounded and whatnot were having to take up some of these jobs because you need every able-bodied man off dying of the sun needlessly. And I say needlessly because really a lot of the strategies used in World War I are just disgraceful because they were just a meat grinder and they threw men's lives away like they were nothing. And I know I speak disapprovingly, but it's just World War I and II were just a series of horrors and tragedies that.
Tolkien, being a soldier in World War I, and while in the trenches writing the fall of Gondolin, definitely had an effect on the way that story goes. The original fall of Gondolin, it's probably the most brutal, the grittiest combat that he writes in any of his mythology is that writing, and you can understand why, because he's actually experiencing it daily
in real time
while he's writing that story. So
so Freddie's fulfilling a very important role, and there were soldiers, or at least men, who fulfilled this type of role, and a lot of women also fulfilled these sort of roles in World War I and II because, as I said, a lot of the men were off being slaughtered, and it's just but a test lab for industrializing warfare. Yeah, sadly, and of course, a lot of that industrializing of warfare also meant that countless French castles along the frontier were just gone. Probably 1,500 years of French history just erased.
All right, I'm gonna tell you. I'll try to keep it fast. I'm gonna tell you a story. Grandpa Rice, World War II. He was an Army chaplain. He was with the 101st Airborne, and they were obviously airdropped into France.
Wow!
And so he's this Army chaplain. They're in France. They're trying to take back city by city, essentially. And he describes he was interviewed years later by the he was a Lutheran, and it was the Lutheran Council did a interview series, and so he did he put his words down. So he's telling the story. He's in France. They've liberated a town. I forgot the name of the town, but the problem is they hadn't quite liberated it the way they thought. So they thought they'd taken the town, but immediately the Germans pushed back, and so there's like an immediate retreat. problem is they got a bunch of dying people in a basement, in a church basement, that can't be moved. And so Grandpa Rice has to make a decision. Like, I'm not leaving these guys, you know. So he's like, he and his assistant are going to just stay with these dying men in this basement. And so they're there. They hear bombs going off, you know, grenades going off down the street as the Germans are moving in. And he's kind of like, this might be it. He looks up. He sees a German soldier at the street level with one of those grenades, one of those, whatever, potato masher grenades they have. And he's like, okay, this is it. So he starts just like saying the Lord's Prayer, and he just closes his eyes, and time passes, and like he's still saying the prayer, and no, nothing's happening. And okay, I'll keep talking. And he risks looking up, and he sees that this soldier has knelt and is saying the prayer in German. And then that soldier promptly like dropped his grenade, and he went and surrendered to the Americans. Cut to decades later, my dad, who was born in 1940, we lived in Germany at an army base. He met this guy who was now like a liaison to the American forces in Germany. This guy who was a German soldier who was going to throw a grenade at my granddad, who then surrendered. They became friends after the war. And anyway, it's an amazing story. And somehow my family survived that encounter.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah. Anyway, it was
The
just a
courage on both sides. And World War II, right?
World War II. World War II.
So he was, that German soldier had impossible to imagine courage. We got to bear in mind the Nazi upper command and middle command were not exactly known for their gentility towards anyone, especially their own people.
Yeah. The fact that they both survived this war, this German soldier and my chaplain grandfather, it is a miracle anyway.
I just think that soldier should get a lot of praise because he defied.
Yeah. In that moment, he was like, you know what? I am not going to throw a grenade at a bunch of dying guys on cots. That's it. This is where I draw the line.
And there's another thing. Well, at least this is how I kind of look at it. This is also the power of prayer and faith that we once had in the West, because, like back then, like people would start praying like that and it cut across both sides.
Right. Well, the fact that it was a shorthand for both of them. They both knew this prayer. The German guy, even though it was in English, he could tell by the rhythm of it, and that, oh, you're doing the Lord's Prayer. I'll do the Lord's Prayer too. So it was a shorthand. It was a little way to have a common language.
And we have Gigi Quillian. I hope I said that.
Hey, Gigi! Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you as well. All is well. Fancy meeting you here too. Welcome.
Well, yeah. Now, back to another Germano-Anglo tale of heroism and nobility. I don't think we could use any other words to describe what the great story you just told. That great piece of history. And we have here the fact that Freddie decides he doesn't want to leave and he's going to do the Kevin McAllister thing.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Frodo dictates to his friends that they're pretty much going to have to pack it in early. And, well, Mary tells them that we have still got to tidy up and put the finishing touches to the packing before we get to bed. I shall call you all before the break of day. And we get, of course, Frodo's struggles to fall asleep. And this is where he ends up having a dream. And
the dream, this is maybe one of the more revelatory parts of this chapter, for sure.
Yep. In that dream, he hears the sound of the far-off sea. And it's not a sound he's ever heard before, but somehow he hears it. And and a great desire came over him to climb the tower and see the sea, is what to redirect.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly a light came in the sky and there was a noise of thunder. Now, it's not explicitly said, but, well, it's basically said, Ulmo. Like, we know it's Ulmo because this little bit, this paragraph, has so much in common with that Tuor, son of Huor, tale when he first meets Ulmo in the tale of Gondolin. And honestly, like, this is probably alongside the bit about the Brandy Hall at the beginning of the chapter. This is probably tied as my favorite paragraph in this chapter because I just love this detail about the sea and how Frodo suddenly dreams of it. And
yeah, and it's, I mean, there's more to this, and I'll talk about the origins of this dream here in a second. But in terms of non-world origins, but yeah, the fact that this thing is he's dreaming of hearing a sea that he says he's never heard in waking life. So like, yeah, how do you dream about a thing that you've never actually witnessed? It's an interesting aspect of that dream. It occurred to me that this comes the night that he crosses the Brandywine where his parents died, that maybe there is a somehow sense of the water itself. But I think it's the most likely scenario is that, right. So somebody asks, is it Ulmo or is it Umo via Urmo? Right. However it works, it suggests very strongly that Ulmo somehow he's housing very close to the Brandywine River, that perhaps Ulmo has reached out with some guidance through his dreams, as he's been known to do in prior in the mythology.
Yeah, and Ulmo is always the Valar who's always out to help, where the others don't help as much. He's always the one who reaches out, helps, guides heroes. I know
he shipped the elves over on their own island across to the west back in the day. He's the Valar that steps out from the comfort of the West to interact. He interacts with Middle Earth the most directly, I would say, of the Valar.
I think as much as he's the Valar of the sea, I would also say he's the Valar of heroes.
Okay.
He fulfills a role very similar to Othin from Norse mythology. That is to say, Othin, or Odin, is known to house warriors in his halls and be the All-Father and pretty much a sky god. But he is a god of heroes in Norse mythology. And so, in a way, this aspect of Othin has been transferred to Ulmo rather than Manwë, in a sense, so that I find it one of the most interesting aspects of Ulmo as a character.
I have a bit of a thought, because we know the Valar a lot of them are different kinds of leaders and
Different elements.
Yes, but Ulmo, being of the sea, is like a ship captain. A ship captain has to interact with the crew. He has to be alongside them.
Yeah.
Whereas Manwë, being a bit more like a king.
Yeah, I think that's the idea.
There's an aspect of it that's detached.
Yeah, but I also think that to an extent, we also got to look at how the sea has been represented in previous centuries and in poetry and whatnot. It took great courage for a lot of men and even women, to be fair, as you had like the Feeds and whatnot, to sail from one end of the sea to the other. But we also get a idea with Ulmo. he is both wondrous and terrible in a way. The sea is both a wonderful thing, but also a terrifying thing, as it can be the most beautiful sight on earth, but also gives rise to terrible things like tsunamis. So there is that aspect as well to Ulmo. And in a way, we're seeing here the idea that Tolkien has that the sea is good, but it's not safe. And this old philosophy is some furline in a way in Howard and Tolkien's writing, and even Lewis. And the idea is that a good person or a good figure is not necessarily someone who is safe, as there's no such thing as safety in their, at least to their minds, philosophically. And that is something.
Right. Something that's dangerous is not necessarily bad by default. It can be dangerous, a dangerous undertaking, but still something positive.
Yeah. And sometimes I think the other idea is that if you invert it, sometimes safety, like, like you might have Saruman and Sauron, they offer safety, but they're evil. So there's also that aspect. Or you have Zaltotun who's offering safety over in the Hyborian Age, and even Balric, one of his underlings, but that doesn't mean they're good. They're offering safety, certainly, but it's a safety of a horrible kind. And that's where I find it a very interesting philosophy and school of thought.
Like a dangerous kind of safety.
Well, it's not dangerous. Like, you're safe within the cage until you're killed. The thing is, this is, I think, the idea, and it's that you are encasing yourself, you're doing it to yourself, really. And whereas someone who is good is not safe, because the whole idea is that you got to bear in mind, in previous eras, the idea was that, okay, how do I put it? Man is not a domesticated animal. So there's something naturally dangerous and wild about human beings because we are animals. And so you have this contrast in a way between the two ideas. Like you look at one popular image of a king, like Conan's spirit animal and totem of sorts, and his symbol as a king is the lion. You don't really want to cage a lion. And that's, I think, the idea. Conan is good, but he's not safe, much like a lion is as a symbol. Because, like, lions are supposed to be, the image is good, but you don't want to be anywhere near it to an extent because it can be dangerous. And yes, well put. Ulmo is a god of heroes. He is of the sea, but also rivers and streams connect him deep into Middle-earth. Yeah, and thus he's able to cheat, because those rivers and whatnot are all cheats.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting, in that dream, and I'll talk about this. I'll just mention, and I've got the quote down here, but there's an earlier version of this dream. This dream in the Treason of Isengard, we see earlier drafts of this dream. And this is almost like a little artifact from an earlier version of the story. And so in the earlier version of the story, it makes more sense as to how the story was played out. But it's interesting that the story changed, but the dream kind of stayed the same. And so now it is more interpretive. It has more of an Ulmo sense to it. Whereas I'll tell you, as I'll show you in a second, it's a little more like on the nose originally. But just to say that, so it says in the dream that in the canon version, looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower standing alone on a high ridge, and he's near the sea. That tall white tower is almost certainly the Tower Hills. So we're talking, the tower holding the Elendil stone, Elistirion. And so he's talking about looking out to the west. I did a video, I think it was for Tolkien Reading Day, where I was describing, like, there's that line of like, oh, there was a fairy wife in the Tookish line. Like, could there possibly have been Elvish in the Tookish line? And as part of my evidence for that, I talk about this poem because it suggests this kind of elvish longing to go to the west. The elves as we saw with Gildor, they make a pilgrimage to that tower to go and gaze into the Elendil Stone, to gaze to the west, to get a glimpse of Varda. And so the fact that Frodo is having this elvish longing in a dream suggests somehow that he's perhaps got some kind of a, some bit of elvish in him in some way. But anyway, not to say that that's 100% the case. It's just an interesting little, evaluation. But
and narratively, it hints at the end for Frodo.
Right. And certainly hints at the end for Frodo. Right. Very much so. But so here, just to give you a little interesting glimpse into the work in progress as Tolkien had this. So we get this in the earlier versions of this is from the Treason of Isengard. So it mentions Gandalf is besieged in the Western Tower. So originally Gandalf isn't in Orthanc. He is imprisoned in the Tower Hills, the White Tower next to the sea. He cannot get away while they guard it with 5 riders. So there's 5 black riders that are guarding him, locked up in the tower. But when the black riders have located Frodo and found that he's gone off without Gandalf, they ride away. And so at this point, the dream was happening when Frodo was sleeping in Bree. So he's met up with the version of Aragorn, which is Trotter. But in any case, he has his dream in Bree, and the remaining riders have discovered that Frodo is in Bree, and so the call goes out, and so the black riders leave Gandalf to his own in the White Tower. And so the dream is Frodo soon went to sleep again, but now he passed at once into a dream. He found himself on a dark heath. Looking up, he saw before him a tall white tower, standing alone upon a high ridge. Beyond it, the sky was pale, and far off there was a murmur like the voices of the great sea, which he had never heard nor beheld, save in other dreams. In the topmost chamber of the tower, there shone dimly a blue light. Suddenly, he found that he had drawn near, and the tower loomed high above him. About its feet, there was a wall of faintly shining stones, and outside the wall sat silent watchers. Black-robed figures on black horses, gazing at the gate of the tower without moving, as if they'd sat there forever. There came at last the soft fall of hoofs climbing up the hill. The watchers all stirred and turned slowly towards the sound. They were all looking towards Frodo. He did not dare to turn, but he knew that behind him another dark figure, taller and more terrible, had appeared. It beckoned and called out in a strange tongue. The horsemen leaped to life. They raised their dark heads towards the lofty chamber, and their mocking laughter rang out cruel and cold. Then they turned from the white wall and rode down the hill like the wind. The blue light went out. It seemed to Frodo that the riders came straight towards him. But even as they passed over him and beat him to the ground, he thought in his heart, I'm not here. They cannot hurt me. There is something I must see. He lifted his head and saw a white horse leap the wall and stride towards him. On it rode a gray-mantled figure. His white hair was streaming. His cloak flew like wings behind him. As the gray rider bore down upon him, he strove to see his face. The night grew in the sky, and suddenly there was the noise of thunder. And that's where it ends. So I know it's a longer bit there, but I just thought it's interesting because you see a lot of that dream in this dream, but it's also very specific to the fact that Gandalf's been imprisoned, not at Orthanc, but in the White Tower. When the Nazgul head out, Gandalf immediately gives chase and is following after them, because he's trying to catch up with Frodo. So anyway, just a little, it's interesting how that kept its form, if not meaning, in the final version.
Yeah. And we have a interesting comment from DG, I think it is, Quillian, about having an affinity and fear of water, a healthy but cautious fear of drowning in it. Well, I think that as a child, I had a fear of drowning, but the more I've interacted with water over the course of my life, the more I've grown fond of it and developed a stronger affinity for it. And so I do understand having a cautious fear of it, but also having a deep abiding affection for it.
Yeah, I think when I first like, I mean, it get kind of grim, I guess, but when I was first like, 12, 13, early teenagerdom, whatever, like starting to come to terms with like mortality, you get that there's that some age hits where you're like, oh wow, like
Yeah.
we're mortal beings. I always imagined death being like drowning, and it really scared me. Like I was just like, I was a little petrified at the idea that at some point, eventually, I will drown. And anyway, I kind of dealt with that. I'm good with it now. I don't think that's the way this works, but in my little like facile version of the way death works, I was like, oh my god, this is terrible. Anyway, so yeah, the idea of drowning, there's a very primordial, you know, fear about that, I think.
Yep. And it's one I think that a lot of people make some measure of peace with over the course of their lives, and it's a very fascinating thing. We now have Mark. Now I wonder, elves and dwarves stopping by at Bag End on the way either to or from the Tower Hills or the Blue Mountains. Yeah, that's precisely what happened back when Bilbo was master of Bag End.
Yep. It's mentioned in those early chapters, and he probably heard about those towers from them. Although it says
And
that I think since he's never seen the sea, I guess that means he's never seen the White Towers.
yeah, and we
Is what
have
that suggests.
Gigi, who read The Lord of the Rings at 14, immediately after finishing The Hobbit. Interesting. Our family moved away from the lake to the Ozarks that same year. I missed and longed for those waters. There's a lot to water.
Oh yeah, I've been to the Lake of the Ozarks a few times, especially in the fall. Man, the foliage in the Lake of the Ozarks is amazing. It's a people come from miles around to see it. One of the things I remember about the Lake of the Ozarks was, you probably know it better than me actually, but there's a park. It's called Hahatonka State Park, and there's this guy around 1920, 1910, 1920 decided to build a castle on a bluff overlooking the Lake of the Ozarks. And it's kind of a tragic story where he got into building it, but there was no road there. He's in the middle of nowhere, so he had to build a road to get there, move all the supplies, and he died before he finished it. And then his sons finished it, and then it promptly burned down. And now it's just like ruins of a castle on top of this bluff overlooking the Lake of the Ozarks. But it looks amazing. Like, it's like, oh, wow, you feel like you might be, somewhere in the British Isles or something. But it's actually right there in middle America, these castle remnants, burned down castle remnants looking out over the lake. It's an affecting sight.
Now, I myself wasn't raised exactly near the sea, but our grandfather loved boating, fishing. Our father loved going to the lake and swimming. He loved it. And every chance as a child, he would drag me out there. I sometimes liked it, sometimes I didn't. He was always disappointed when I didn't. So, and over the years, as I got older and I've gotten older, I've kind of inherited that passion for the sea from him. And also from our grandfather, who was positively obsessed. Our father and grandfather, because father-in-law and son-in-law didn't always get along, but it's the one thing they passionately agreed on. Ulmo uses dreams to communicate to his heroes. Tukes might have a special connection to Ulmo, very likely. And there's also the Brandy Buck connection.
No, that's a good call. Because as we'll see throughout the series, these dreams. In fact, very soon, when Frodo is staying with Tom Bombadil, he's going to have some more dreams. But yeah, dreams obviously they're a little shorthand for Tolkien to like check in with the character a little bit throughout the trilogy.
I think you're right. Makes me wonder about Smeagol and Deagle being in those waters and how they may have played a part in the ring being found. Okay, I'm actually going to say I don't think Ulmo had anything to do with the ring being found exactly. That was the ring, I would
That's an
argue.
interesting point, though. I mean, it is. It was, lost in water, and then the fact that it came off. It's not something that Isildur doesn't throw the ring away. I love the line when it's described that in the Battle of the Gladden Fields when he loses the ring, and there's this moment of like, oh God, what happened? And then this relief. I forgot how it's described exactly, but he has this sense of, oh my God, oh thank the Lord, I don't have to, like, this burden is off of me. It's a totally involuntary act, but he's so pleased that it's happened after it's happened. But the fact that it falls off somehow, who knows? Maybe there is a little Ulmo interference in that moment.
Maybe. Although
probably more of an Eru than an Ulmo, but yeah.
It might be strange, but I tend to think of the ring as being kind of more under its own influence. Although when it comes to its destruction and some of the surrounding events, yes, Eru, but I don't know about the loss of the ring.
No, you're right. You're right that I think there's an implication that the ring is sentient enough to realize that Isildur's task, if he completes it, which there's a question as to whether he could have ever completed it, but his intention at that moment is to give the ring to Elrond for Elrond to decide what to do with it. And we get the feeling that Elrond's decision, at least again, his intention would be to destroy it. So the ring is feeling threatened. So it somehow, influences a horde of orcs to attack them, and then finds its moment to get away from Isildur.
But that's where the ring is making a bit of a tactical and strategic error, humorously enough, in my view. It abandons Isildur, that leads to Isildur's death. But here's the thing. There was no one capable in the House of Elrond, had Isildur brought it, who could have taken it to Mount Doom.
Right. And we get words from Tolkien saying that ultimately Isildur couldn't have actually turned it over. Like they would have had to figure out some trick to have him somehow like put it down and walk away, and then somebody grabs it, because I think in that moment he wouldn't have been able to physically hand it over to someone. It would have been too difficult.
Is even if he had given it over to Elrond, Elrond will be corrupted by it, and he would become far more terrible and great and wicked in a way than Isildur could have been. And this is ultimately where the ring makes a key mistake, because through the waters, it ends up in Smeagol's hands, and from there it ends up in Bilbo's hands, and then from there Frodo. And when it's brought out the Council of Elrond, it cannot corrupt Elrond because it's not given over to Elrond. So and Elrond is very careful not to let it be given over to him, because once it's given over, it will corrupt him.
Yeah, so I see your point. Your point being that the ring, which maybe suggests more that it was accidental, but you're right that the ring is better off going from being in the hands of someone in power, because it can corrupt that person, as opposed to hanging out in a riverbank for hundreds of years because it no longer has the ability to affect someone.
Yeah, to an extent. Although when it comes to the ring, I honestly don't think it's good in anyone's hands. But on the other hand, I'm not suggesting it has like this long-term strategy. No, we got to bear in mind, it is stated in the text, it mostly does short-term things for its own survival. And obviously Isildur had outlived his usefulness, and he was a potential threat to it. But what's ironic is that what would have happened would have been far worse had it been brought into Rivendell. And yet, it is brought into Rivendell later, but under different circumstances and by a different wielder, who actually has the ability to bring it to Mount Doom. And this is the key difference between Frodo and Isildur, and even Elrond. Elrond could not have undertaken that journey with the ring.
Well, and as we see, hobbits generally, right, between Smeagol, Bilbo, and Frodo and Sam, throw him in there as well. You have hundreds of years worth of ring bearers that somehow at least managed to maintain some semblance. In Smeagol's case, a little dicey, but still, considering how long he was with that ring, he freaking held on to his humanity fairly well, considering that hobbits generally, their nature, their personalities, their quality of mercy allows for them to kind of withstand the ring better than humanity.
Yeah, and do you think maybe it wasn't the choice of the ring to abandon Isildur? Or maybe it found its way into the river because of a divine intervention?
Just kind of what we've been chatting about here. But
yeah, I think it was the ring. It was not Eru intervening there. I'm very careful about saying, oh, this or that or Eru's intervention. Too many people remove free will from the story.
Right. If everybody's just puppets, the story doesn't have the same effect.
And it means that all of them are really slaves, and Eru is just, I don't know, playing around, having fun, and playing sock puppets with himself. And that doesn't make. I think that also conflicts with Tolkien's worldview.
Gigi is asking about connections between Ulmo and Poseidon or Neptune. Yes, I mean, one of the things about Neptune / Poseidon, they are obviously sea gods, but they are also associated with dreams. I mean, dreams are front and center in their spheres of influence. So it doesn't really go against that at all to have Ulmo be someone who can affect people through their dreams.
Although we also have to bear in mind the difference between Ulmo and Poseidon is that Poseidon in a lot of myths is more the villain of the piece.
Okay.
And Ulmo is much more a heroic figure.
I got you. I feel like I can't think of a great example here, but I do feel like it's almost more of a Poseidon. It's almost more of a chaotic force as opposed to an evil force. Like, hey, there might be calm seas, there might be rough seas. It's not going to cater to you, but it's kind of a, depending on the day, what you get is what you get. It's not it doesn't have a purpose to come out and do something terrible to you.
Yeah, that's generally the idea with Ulmo, I think. But with Poseidon, I'm very staunchly of the view. Bear in mind, in every Greek myth, he's either violating a goddess or a woman, or as in the Odyssey, he's wreaking undue vengeance upon Odysseus. Now, I do think Odysseus did his fair share to earn some of the vengeance and wrath. But on the other hand, Poseidon is a little too quick to the trigger.
I got you.
In most myths. So there is that aspect. This is not Othin from the Norse myths, who's fiercely protective of humanity and begins to do things like snap his own neck and all his bones in one myth, or rip out his eyeball in order to gain knowledge to protect humanity. This is a much different, almost hostile force that, it implies a certain fear of the seas on the parts of the Greeks at the time. And on the other hand, Ulmo,
as Gigi says, she says the Greek versions are more petulant. Yeah, there's this things like revenge and petty squabbles turning into life or death events rears a ugly head.
Interesting idea, Mark. Is a heroic but very hard forgiving at will. They're very petulant. They're even toying with humans.
Whereas you don't feel like Ulmo is toying with anyone. He's trying to be helpful in discreet ways.
I'm also going to extend that to the other Valar. I don't think they're really hostile.
I agree.
People. I think
they're aloof, if anything.
Yeah, there's a difference between aloofness and the Greek gods. Mm-hmm. Now, to look at the Norse, for example, what they did with the sea is interesting because you have Aegir, who's the terrible one who's likely to pitch a fit and the seas go crazy. But then you have Njord, who's the more gentle sea god and sea father. So that you have these two opposites within the sea. And yet Aegir was to be respected even as he was to be feared, while Njord could be loved. And this is, in hindsight, maybe Olmo takes more from Njord than any other mythological sea god.
Okay.
Njord with a touch of Othin in there. Although Varda herself has a bit of more of Freya to her, the queen of the Norse gods, the queen of the Aesir, or the Azinor, or Azinjor of Norse mythology. They're not hostile, except for Morgoth.
He who should not be named Voldemort, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they're more of a little hands-off approach.
Yep. And I think we've discussed this chapter and we've moved to the Silmarillion mythology. Not a blast with that, but I think we've kind of wrapped this chapter up. And next chapter we'll be starting off with arguably the first real journey. And yes, I had to name him. I do not fear the black foe of the world.
Oh no! Yes,
I'm Hurin.
Our fate is sealed.
Yeah,
both of them. Yeah,
spitting in his mouth or something, and well, I'll probably get a curse for that. Or maybe I'm Thingol, housing his enemies for too long until I get thrown the Nauglamir. I hope not. I don't want to bury my son before I pass.
Yeah, but it is cool that this dream, the fact that this part of the story was still being crafted, and we have elements of the very different drafts of this section of the story in particular. And we'll see that again come up when it comes to Aragorn / Trotter. And so I'm looking forward to when that comes around. There's some really interesting differences, like artifacts again of the early version of Trotter that still exists in some of these early writings when we get to meet Aragorn. So, well, that's
I prefer Aragorn to Trotter.
Oh, I definitely do too. But it's interesting because there's a few things that you go, huh, why is that in there? And then if you think back to what Aragorn was originally, it makes sense. So that's a thing for later.
No, I'm actually going to freely admit the Trotter chapters I consider some of the worst writing I've ever read. And I think it gives hope to all writers, because if Tolkien could have really bad early drafts and look at the end result, it means even if you screw up on your early drafts, it doesn't necessarily mean your final draft is going to be terrible.
That's right. Write and rewrite.
Yep. You should have at least 6 to 12 different drafts along the way, like the good professor did. Nobody is Mozart. Not even Mozart was Mozart in a way. He should have had more drafts to some of his music. Tolkien, I would argue, was Beethoven.
Okay.
Because Beethoven had a lot of different drafts of his music.
I see.
Kept going back and fixing it, even after he published it. He would go back, fix it, retune it, and then republish continuously, trying to perfect every song and symphony, or I should say sonata and symphony, until he basically released the greatest musical piece in history, the Ninth, which combined everything from every sonata and symphony that he's ever composed. So arguably Tolkien's kind of following in that kind of, I would argue, that kind of, I don't want to say literary or musical, but like that kind of artistic lineage.
Elfriend is just saying, it was just drafting a post about why Tolkien had so many songs. Exactly. How did we know? We're prescient. That's what it is.
Yep. And
that sounds like an awesome, I assume that's we say post, you mean maybe a video or something, but whatever it is, post video sounds like something people should check out. So check out Elfriend's content.
Yep. And but yeah, so I think we're at the end. So I'm going to do I guess, the outro, since I don't think we'll...
All right. Just we'll be back talking about chapter 6, The Old Forest, next time. So thank you, good sirs. It's always awesome to talk to you guys.
And you as well. So don't forget to go smash that like and that subscribe button on the stream, because we're streaming at 3 different locations. And also go check out, most of all, Matt's Dork Lords channel, which is a great channel for Tolkien. I especially do love his very Took Bride video, and his discussion of Agnor and Andreth. Which I still think that video of yours is the best video on that particular story.
Oh, well, thank you. No, it's it's one of those things like, oh, wow. A lot of people haven't heard of it, but it really, Tolkien wrote a really rich passage there. That conversation, it has a lot going on in it. Anyway,
it has a lot in common with things like the Analects of Confucius, the books by Plato on Socrates. Like it's just one of those Socratic dialogues between two characters. Your analysis of it was really, really good.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot to me.
I still go back and re-listen because it's such a great video.
Andreth, indeed, Gigi. So yes, thank you to you guys. Thank you to everybody out there for hanging out in the stream. Great questions, great comments. I love. You know what? Before I did these live stream things, I didn't realize the joy of seeing the commenters like having their own little social thing while we're talking. It's great. I love it. Anyway,
yeah. And
thumbs up.
Honestly, it's also like, I'll be honest. Always Dan and I were doing the book club things with either the Conan channels or the occasional stream with the likes of Girl Next Door or Josh over the Tolkien Lore Geek. And then we started doing this Lord of the Rings book club set of streams, which are exciting in their own way. But I also rediscovered a bit of the joy of streaming recently through doing I think it's called a chill stream, where you just hang out and you chat with the chat. And you don't have a particular topic except to kind of plug the channel and plug, well, in our case, our Substack and indie fantasy, because there's a lot of it on Substack. So we've been plugging that lately. And, like that stuff is fun to talk about and discuss and compare with Tolkien, compare with Howard, and just geek out for 2 hours. So definitely understand what you mean when it's like, there's a joy in seeing the chat scroll through and whatnot. And yeah, these Ring Lord streams are definitely up there as some of my favorite content to do, because I love Lord of the Rings and I love doing these deep dives, because honestly, this is like the highlight of my month these days. Okay. It won't be chill when we start with the Gil-galad's father.
Right. Them's fighting words. Who could it be? Yeah.
Fingon or
You're the father. You're the father.
Oh my gosh. It's always going to come back to that with us, Mark.
But yes.
But
fun as always.
Yeah. And if ever you want to join one of our chill streams to discuss indie fantasy or such topics, Matt, you're free to drop on by, because
I appreciate the invite, and I will make good on that.
Yep. Our next few are on. Well, we're going to be trying to get it into our schedule to always do it on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and that's because we're now doing events on Substack called Warrior Wednesdays and Sword and Saturdays, where we just plug everyone's serial novels, short stories, and also reviews, essays on Tolkien and Howard. It's getting to be quite fun seeing this growing, I guess you could say, fellowship over there. So, yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, well, figured we'd extend you the invite, because we have mostly, I think, Howard fans coming into, like, who are fellow YouTubers.
You got to balance it out, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, we got to balance it out with some Lord of the Rings love, because it's good to have some Conan fans, but we also need some fans of Tolkien to come in and reinforce the Rohirrim.
So be it. Right now. Yeah.
But anyways, we'll see when the next stream can be. I'm fairly busy for a bit of January, but let's hope we can get another stream before things get a little more
Chaotic.
Yeah, in the next quarter of the year. So
We'll do it.
take care, everyone, and really glad that we had so many people join us, and we had about a dozen viewers throughout this entire stream, which is just
awesome.
Yeah, that's the first here. It's more common on your channel.
And plus, the number of live streams I've done are minuscule. So this is all still the lab. We're still experimenting here. So
yeah, well, we're experimenting here as well. So
good night, Gigi. Good night, everybody.
Take care, everyone. And I guess we should say, to quote Tolkien Lore Geek, Namarie.